welcome on behalf of Penguin India and Tata Steel Kolkata Literary Meet to a very special evening and to a discussion on a subject that needs to spread as far and as wide as possible. I am Ghosh Srijit, and as you know, of course, the special guests this evening are Amitav Ghosh and Srijit Mukherji. Now, though I could follow the cliché and say that they need no introduction, I believe an introduction is still in order, considering the influence these two gentlemen have had on our thoughts and practices. Amitav Ghosh is the author of such acclaimed fiction as The Circle of Reason, which was, of course, his debut novel, The Shadow Lines, The Calcutta Chromosome, The Glass Palace, The Hungry Tide, and the Ibis trilogy, Sea of Poppies, River of Smoke, and Flood of Fire. His notable non-fiction writings are In an Antique Land, Dancing in Cambodia and at Large in Burma, Countdown, and The Imam and the Indian. In The Great Derangement, Climate Change and the Unthinkable, which is Amitabh's first major book of non-fiction since In an Antique Land, he examines our inability at the level of literature, history, and politics to grasp the scale and violence of climate change. The climate crisis asks us to imagine other forms of human existence, a task to which fiction, Amitabh argues, is the best suited of all cultural forms. His book serves as a great writer's summons to confront the most urgent task of our time. In conversation with him is Srijit Mukherji, filmmaker, actor, and screenwriter, who came to the limelight with his first feature film, Autograph. He has made 8 films since then: Baishe Srabon, Hemlock Society, Mishar Rahosho, Jatishwar, Chotushkon, Nirbak, and Rajkahini, won multiple national awards, and is currently working on his first Hindi film, Begum Jaan, a remake of Rajkahini. For those accustomed to thinking of him purely in cinema-related terms, it may be pertinent to mention that Srijit has an MPhil in environmental economics from Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, having worked as a social scientist in the urban transport and pollution sector of the Energy and Resources Institute in New Delhi. Before we begin, and before I welcome Amitav and Srijit onto the dais, we will watch a short audiovisual presentation encapsulating the theme for the evening. Varun is waiting in the wings to play the audiovisual, and here it is.
Climate events are very, very difficult to write about. Extreme events, improbable events are very difficult to write about. And I know this myself as a writer. I had an extraordinary encounter with a very, very strange weather event. I didn't even recognize what it was because, we in India have very little awareness of phenomena like tornadoes. For years afterwards, I tried to write about this event in a sort of meaningful way. I tried to sort of even think of incorporating it in my books and novels, and I always found myself struggling with it.
I'm a marine ecologist. I've been working in the system quite some years now. And what I can tell you is the oceans are being hit in various ways that you cannot even imagine. Just look at the cost of our seafood production. What does it mean to produce those fish on your table? Now the major gear that's used to catch and produce a lot of our seafood is trawl fishers. Now this is a technique that is really unselective, it's destructive. You target a few species, but you pretty much catch an entire ecosystem in your net. Now this not just obviously has an impact on the ecosystem, but it also has a huge impact on livelihoods of small-scale fishing communities that depend on a lot of these fish species, and also a long-term sort of survival of that fishery itself. You have all these multiple stressors acting on a marine system, that have an impact, as I said, not just on ecosystems, but also on livelihoods. And you sort of have the overarching umbrella of climate change. Now that is like the recipe for a perfect storm.
Just this year, this incredible heat wave that we've had across northern India and across central India, it's astonishing, unprecedented.
It's problem modeling the monsoon. So even now, climate models don't all agree on whether the monsoon rainfall will increase or decrease. But what all models agree about is that the frequency of extremes is going to change, which means the frequency of droughts and excess rainfall years, that is going to be changed. For example, in 2015, you know that we are sitting in Maharashtra. In Marathwada region of Maharashtra, more than 1,000 farmers committed suicide. And you and I were paying more than rupees 200 per kilo of tur dal. Now these are all adverse impacts of the drought. So the question arises, are we adapting to this? And after all, unlike unexpected effects of climate change, droughts are nothing new. We've experienced droughts for centuries. So we should have been able to adapt. Are we adapting to it? Unfortunately, it appears that we are not adapting to it, and still there are very large impacts on agriculture, economy and so on.
If you consider that, Parliament just a couple of weeks ago finally held a session to talk about the drought, and only 80 MPs turned up to discuss what is the single most important thing that is happening in this country right now. I mean, it really does in a way defy belief.
The inconvenient truth in climate change is not that climate change is happening, but that climate change is about sharing the economic growth between nations and within nations.
I mean, if you look at the most recent sorts of weather-related events around India, so for example, these terrible deluges that have happened in Mumbai in these last 8 to 10 years, this terrible deluge that we saw in Chennai, last year. I mean, those things are on our doorstep.
What does it mean for our cities? It means that we need to design our systems so well that you have much better systems of sanitation. You have no water retention that happens in your cities. You're able to design your green areas in ways in which your green spaces can absorb the extreme heat that happens. You need to design your cities so that you can hold the water when it falls.
Over the last 150 years or so, the direction that literature and literary fiction has taken has carried it away from all sorts of natural engagements. It's carried it more and more towards abstractions of various kinds. It's become, literature has become more and more sort of focused on urban areas, on the urban experience, on urbanity as such. That to me raises many, many interesting questions. How is it that literature, which in many ways has always historically dealt with the most important issues in the human condition, why is it that literature has turned away from this? In that sense, you could say that the whole trajectory of fiction is also imbricated in the same kind of derangement that carries people closer and closer to the sea, where they're so exposed to all these natural impacts.
Today, we are voiceless, we are powerless. We are not asking our leaders to step up their game because it concerns us, our present, and our children's future. It concerns the survival of humankind.
I would request Amitav and Srijit to please take the stage and officially launch the Great Derangement, Climate Change and the Unthinkable. Over to you now, Srijit. The conversation will last 45 minutes, after which we shall have a 25-minute question and answer session with the audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the discussion on the Great Derangement, Mr. Ghosh's latest offering. And suffice to say that, like most of you in the audience, probably all of you in the audience, I'm again a huge admirer of Mr. Ghosh's work and have been following his work since years now. I've literally grown up with his work, and the first novel which I read was Calcutta Chromosomes, and I couldn't stop after that, and I was always following what new title would come up. And so when Malavika told me this discussion, this was slated and was a possibility, I was very, very excited. I just completed my shoot, but I was supposed to fly back to Bombay, but I said nothing doing. As I was telling him that I would have been here come what may. Only possibly a tornado or a cyclone could have stopped me. So I read the book. I gobbled it up like most Amitav Ghosh books, because believe it or not, I think that whenever you're watching a documentary by a master filmmaker, the fact that it's a documentary doesn't really seep through. It remains a fantastic piece of storytelling, which this book is, despite it being a non-fiction book, like the category being non-fiction, which in itself is one of the major concerns which have been addressed in the book, that why is this book non-fiction? Why is the category of this book non-fiction? Why aren't such books, or books which straddle similar lines or similar concerns or address similar questions, categorized under fiction? So I'll just get into that question. It is a question which has been dealt in so many layers. The premise has been set up beautifully, and we've followed the entire structure of the poetics. So we have a climax, and we have a pre-climax, and we have interaction. So I'll get into the question. Before that, I just wanted to seek all of your permission. I have made some notes, so I will refer to my phone from time to time and get into the discussion. This is again a very carbon intensive device, so I apologize for being a party to the entire. So I was shooting Begum Jaan in this place called Padchor in Jharkhand, which historically has not seen extreme weather for the last 20 years. Which was told to me by my guide and my research team before we kind of set on the location. But when we reached there, first of all, there was this huge storm again, which kind of raised my entire set to the ground 7 days into its construction. And when we recovered, the entire schedule was peppered by very, very schizophrenic weather. So sunshine, rain, storm, sunshine, rain, storm. So extreme weather phenomena is something which is actually affecting all of us in various walks of life. Whether or not we're in denial doesn't matter, but it is. So I would like to start this discussion by asking that you do, you do realize that most of your books have this reference of extreme weather phenomena, maybe not the particular one that you spoke of, the 1978 tornado, but be it the Hungry Tide, be it the Ibis trilogy. So it's not that this consciousness or the recognition, as you discuss in the book, was absent in your work. But what your contention is that your work is possibly kind of exception in that kind of a rule that generally literary fiction has been avoiding.
Interesting question. Well, first of all, let me say how very grateful I am to you for doing this. Your work first came to my attention with Mishor Rohosho, because I've spent a lot of time in Egypt, and it was really so interesting for me to see you engaging with Egypt in that way. And of course, I mean, you're one of the most thoughtful of the filmmakers of your generation, and I do feel that really this whole conversation about climate must go outside, those areas of expertise within which it has been corralled for such a long time. And I think, that greatly to its detriment. I mean, the reason why many people just switch off when you talk about climate change is because, it's always treated in this sort of technocratic way, whereas, as you say, it's actually all around us. It's imploding upon our lives in every possible way. How is it that we don't pay attention to this phenomenon, actually? So, in terms of my work, it's not just my work. I would say that really, in Bengal, especially, filmmakers, for example, like Satyajit Ray, in so many of his films, weather phenomena play really a kind of a catalytic role,
Absolutely.
In Pather Pachali, halfway through, there's this incredible storm, and that's really sort of central to the development of the film. In Jalshaghar, the storm is really the climax of the film. And I think we find this as we go back, really look at the literature of Bengal especially, that storms are absolutely fundamental really to our way of thinking about life, to our way of imagining it. Even Chand Shodagar, there's so many storms in it. It's certainly storms have entered my work, weather phenomena have entered my work in many, many different ways. But I would say that actually, amongst the younger generation of writers and filmmakers, that sensitivity to our surroundings has diminished. Maybe largely because they live in a much more urban world. Their engagements are much more urban. So that may have something to do with it, I think.
Yes, but on the other hand, when you talk about fiction, I was just thinking, yes, possibly in terms of literary fiction, this has gone down. In terms of the films that you were speaking about, yes. But on the other hand, you do have a multitude of, if you're talking Hollywood, if you're talking of other cinema from other part of the world, you do have this entire new genre of disaster films. So, let's say 2012, or maybe a volcano, or you have so many examples. So, why is it that you feel that that is not possibly the greatest of reflections or greatest of manifestations of the concern which climate change has brought into the world, and why is it that it needs to enter it ideally should enter the realm of literary fiction? Because in the introduction we were kind of discussing that the Great Derangement, how it is worrisome that it is not being reflected in the writing all around the world. But don't you think that films also kind of can be as powerful as novels, the modern novel, which you've discussed at great length, how the novel, which in a stark contrast to the earlier epics or poetry for that matter, looks at nature in a very moderate way, in a very kind of gradualistic kind of an interpretation of nature. So don't you think that films are equally potent, or you think that literary fiction is an area where these improbable events, as you put it, should come in more?
Good question. Look, I think it's absolutely true that, certainly in Hollywood, there have been these various films, 2012, Day After Tomorrow, and so on. And, I find those films really gripping. I can't stop watching them. But several things that I would want to say about that, which is that one of the things I'm trying to do in this book is to question my own craft. It's to question my own practice of writing, if you like. So, in that sense, the novel will, of course, be more important for me in one way. The third thing that one needs to note is that while Hollywood does have this, while Hollywood has produced these disaster movies, we have nothing like that in India. That to me seems really strange, actually, because whether you're speaking of serious films or you're thinking of sort of masala films or whatever, I mean, you would think that this would be a genre that might appeal, to...
One of the reasons for that, because the state of animation is a disaster in Indian films. So it's very difficult to actually get into disaster films that way. But quite apart from that also, I think it's also a matter of mindset. Very, very interestingly, so like as I said, the hallmark of a true storyteller is whether you're making a documentary or a feature film, you do solid storytelling. So that's what he does also in the book. So he sets up the premise and then he gets into this investigative mode, something very, very close to the Calcutta chromosomes in terms of how he probes and he gets into the cultural histories of across the world and the geological histories of across the world and how he marries both. So you have spoken about how Bonkin kind of denounced the romantics and the earlier epic way of storytelling, where improbable events and great natural phenomena played a huge role. And he took it to a kind of a slice of life kind of a space in evolving the new modern novel. So what do you think is this reason for this great denouncement, which has come not only in terms of the novel, as you said, also in the cinematic sphere, where our generation, my generation, they have denounced stories, or they have deserted stories which possibly show us living on the shores of the mighty Ganges, or storms actually affecting the plot, being an effective plot point, and moving to a more urban kind of a paradigm in terms of storytelling, where possibly extramarital affair is the metaphor for a storm, and that is about it. So this moving away from the storytelling business, using the natural phenomena, the improbable events that you speak of, moving from poetry to the more gradual, the more state, the more non-cataclysmic stories. So what do you think is the reason? Why have we shifted? Why have we in a search to make our stories more real and more relatable, made it less dramatic in terms of these natural phenomena?
Well, that's interesting, connected in an interesting way with the question you asked earlier about these Hollywood films about disasters and so on. So, see, I mean, one of the issues with these big disaster movies and these big climate change movies is that, strangely, even though these movies are seen by millions of people, I don't think they end up persuading many people about the reality of climate change. I don't think that the appearance of such a film actually persuades any of the climate deniers. And why does that happen? It's actually precisely because they're cast in the genre of science fiction. So there's a whole genre of filmmaking which people have learned to discount as unreal, if you like,
Right.
Films about vampires, films about zombies, and so on. And these films have somehow become assimilated into that.
Right.
People think of it as something very distant, something very far away from their world, So in many of those, in some sense, I would actually say that, Ritik Ghatok's Titash is actually much closer to the reality of climate change than films like that. Yes. Because it shows you the reality of the ways in which environment intrudes upon everyday life. So that exactly is what I would be arguing for, that I think what is important is that we find ways of integrating these changes that we see happening in the world around us into our ways of thinking about normalcy, not about extra normalcy. Because after all, they're impinging upon normal life in so many, just as you, this little example that you gave.
Yep. So, and I think you also take it one step further. Not only do you ask or argue for normalcy, but you also attribute the non-human, which is a very interesting. So you brought about vampires, and we had Harry Potter's birthday 2 days back. So werewolves and vampires, and you've spoken about that in the book, that how they are the bestsellers, and yet the predicament that they foretell is not taken seriously by most people. And again, it's a matter of great irony that the United States of America, being such a huge producer of such films, was the only country, Uncle Sam. So the only country which did not ratify the Kyoto Protocol. So don't you find it greatly ironic, and having spent so much of your time in the West, don't you think it's hypocritical as well?
It's not only the United States, also Australia didn't ratify, So, there's been a lot of research on this, and it's found that the levels of climate denial are actually highest in English-speaking countries, in the Anglosphere, a little lower, a little less so in Britain than elsewhere, but it's basically Canada, Australia, the US, where this phenomenon of climate denial is actually highest. I don't know how one locates, where one locates the reasons for that. But it's clearly because, there's a certain model of consumption that especially these countries have pioneered, on which their economies are built, on which their worldviews are built. And in the sense that climate change is a profound sort of interrogation of that model, I think it's something very difficult for people within that tradition to cope with.
Also, I would add to it, as an environmental economist, erstwhile environmental economist, the combined guilt of the first world in terms of shifting the dirty industries to the third world. Possibly that could also play a role, because I still remember we were like kind of pounding our heads over how to subscribe to the Euro 2 levels and the Euro 3 levels in terms of emissions, in terms of environmental pollution. Whereas I absolutely distinctly remember the United States or the European Union not doing too much about it when it came to applying those regulations in terms of the commitment years which were decided in the Kyoto Protocol. So I think this concern of yours, do you think this concern will, despite even the Paris Agreement, I will just come to the Paris Agreement. So don't you think this concern needs to now, as you said, go from a kind of a disaster movie zone to an actual regulatory zone?
That's one aspect of it, of course. And, there are experts who deal with that, there are diplomats who deal with that, and they have their own way of approaching these problems. To me, what is of interest is exactly this, that we who are in the cultural fields, how have we dealt with this? To me, that is the most pressing question, because, that's where I am, that's where you are. Yes. So, as I see it, if we in our work cannot envisage some sort of change, then how can we expect bureaucrats and so on and diplomats to envisage change either? Because, that's not their job. They don't, it's not their job to imagine other futures. They're just there to implement, everyday sorts of tweaks, and that's actually all that they've done, and that's all that they will do. It's really the burden of imagining a different way of living, a different way of thinking, that falls on us, you and me, which is why I so much wanted to be in conversation with you.
And to scare all of you further, I got very scared after I read the book, because he intends on scaring all of us, and I'll just make it easier. So while I shifted to Bombay to start off my first Hindi venture, just as I shifted, I read The Great Derangement, and there, much to my horror, I saw that the chances of cyclonic activity in the Arabian Sea has gone up by 46%, and that in Bay of Bengal has come down by 31%. Yeah. So as if the storm is following me there. And to make matters worse, Mr. Ghosh has gone to great details in describing what would happen to Mumbai if a moderate, mild-mannered, gentle storm hits Mumbai. And let me tell you, it is not pretty at all. It is possibly slightly, just slightly less than the Qayamat described in Quran, or the prologue described in Sanskrit texts, or the flood and the biblical floods. But actually, he supports every description with facts and expert views. And would you like to scare them slightly?
We on the East Coast, we are accustomed to cyclones. I mean, we know that these great storms come every now and again. And actually, because of that, certain measures have been put in place, evacuation measures and so on, which have proved extraordinarily effective in the last many years. Now, if you think of Mumbai as a city, just think of the shape of it. It's this long, thin peninsula. Actually, it was 6 or 7 islands, and these islands have been filled in through reclaimed land, So there it is. It's this long, thin peninsula. It's completely open to the sea. Unlike, say, New York is inside a harbor, there are barrier islands around it, and yet when Superstorm Sandy hit New York, it was an incredible catastrophe. Many people lost their houses, lost their livelihoods. Now here we have Mumbai. Why did the British choose to build? Because even the Portuguese hadn't built on the islands. They had built on, Vasai and so on. The British actually followed this policy. The strange thing is that New York and Mumbai were founded at almost in the same decade, in the 1660s. Why? Because this was a colonial pattern whereby islands were chosen as, very easily defensible places of habitation. Proximity to water and so on, So Mumbai was chosen for this reason. Mumbai was filled in. And now what we have in Mumbai is this incredible concentration of risk. Because in South Mumbai, all our major financial institutions are concentrated. The Reserve Bank of India headquarters, the stock exchange. And Mumbai also happens to be sandwiched between 2 major nuclear installations, both of which are right on the sea. So you imagine a storm surge coming in, and the phenomenon of the storm surge was discovered in Kolkata actually by Henry Piddington. Yes, such an interesting figure. So if you have this storm surge, just imagine that this is Mumbai and this is the storm surge coming in from the south like this. It'll engulf the southern part of the city on both sides. It would absolutely drown, all those former islands. And I mean, the catastrophe that we are speaking of is on a scale that is almost unimaginable, And of course, how do you prevent a catastrophe like that from occurring? It's through measures of preparedness, which would actually, in this case, mean evacuating 11 million people from southern Mumbai. Even if this was planned for carefully, it would be very, very difficult to actually implement. Because we've seen repeatedly, we saw this in New Orleans during Hurricane Katrina, actually in New York during Sandy, in Tacloban, that actually most people don't leave. And why don't they leave? Because they have nowhere to go. I mean, if you think of yourself suddenly having to evacuate before a storm, where will you go from here? I mean, I suppose you could go to Bardhaman, but then you have to find a place to live in Bardhaman, And there are so many sorts of difficulties.
Absolutely.
I mean, most of us, our sort of friend circle and relative circle tend to be concentrated within the city where we live. So what do you fall back on? Where do you go? And because of that, people stay behind, and that's why these hurricanes and so on, they take such an incredible toll in life, but more than that, in property, in damage. But Mumbai, especially, I think, is a place where anybody who lives there, especially if you live there, you should really think about,
South Mumbai,
yeah, how you would get out in the event of a major storm.
And our lessons from 2005 that also didn't really come through, because we've had that waterlogging again, and all that we've had from talking about popular culture, and so all that we've had from 2005 floods is this film called Tum Mile, where I think Imran Hashmi romances Soha Ali Khan in knee-deep water, shot in Film City, but that's about it. And it was not scary. It was very musical and lyrical. It was not scary at all.
But at least it was there.
I
think that is a step forward. That we register that these things are happening.
Mahesh Bhatt will be very happy that he's taken one step forward in terms of awareness in terms of climate change. But Mumbai sincerely was one of the scariest bits in the book. And also you've spoken about a very interesting nexus, which as an economist I faced in a very different context when I was in the urban transport sector, is the real estate lobby. Now, as you correctly pointed out, that like most of the buildings, so I think it was after the tsunami that you went for the Andaman and Nicobar island survey. So very interestingly, the well-to-do, the rich and the upwardly mobile, they were actually staying along the coastline closest to the danger, and people who were not that well-to-do, they were staying mainlands. So it's kind of strange the way the real estate lobby has really pumped up those locations as a kind of a great, promising and the lifestyle to be in, and yet not making anyone aware that it could be potentially catastrophic for them.
Absolutely, and this is happening across India, and it's happening across the world. Miami Beach, which is one of the most threatened cities anywhere, there's incredible amounts of construction going on right on the beach, even though sea level rise is known to be occurring there, even though the streets of the city flood on a regular basis. Still they're building these giant condominiums for which people pay enormous sums of money. In Chennai just now, I was there this week, and I heard this amazing story. In exactly the area where these floods happened, right on the banks between the Adyar River and the sea, very close to the sea and to the Adyar River, a developer is building a gigantic apartment block, luxury apartment block, with a 7-story basement. Can you imagine? I mean, what can you call that other than complete derangement? I mean, it's sitting in a place where it's going to be flooded, where it's going to be overwhelmed. What can you say? I mean, it's and this is accelerating. Everywhere you go now, not just India but across the world, everywhere you look, there are these giant forests of concrete rising on every side. In the most unlikely places, in Kolkata also, it's being proposed that people start building on the wetlands, which would be such a terrible disaster, because we are protected here really on the one side by mangrove swamps, on the other side by the wetlands, which provide drainage. If these drainage channels are blocked up, we are literally going to be facing doom. There's no doubt about it. I urge you to go and look at a report put out by the World Bank. It's called the Asian Coastal Megacities report. And the report actually focuses mainly on Manila, Bangkok, and so on. The city they had chosen from India was Kolkata. But the risks that Kolkata faces are so high that they actually could not even address them in the main body of this report. But please go and look at that report, because that report gives a ward by ward a ranking of the most dangerous areas of the city. The areas that are going to be probably going to be swamped in the case of a major inundation.
Do you remember where Lake Gardens was?
Lake Gardens, Jodhpur Park, where I live, we are right next to one of the most threatened areas. Okay. So these are also former wetlands,
Welcome. Welcome to the city of joy. No, but yes, and I think doom is a word which people don't take seriously. As we were speaking about Henry Piddington and the curious case of Port Canning, would you like to tell the audience what happened?
Yes, well, Piddington was one of the first atmospheric scientists. In the 1830s and 40s, he lived in Calcutta. He became the first storm chaser, He would run after these cyclones and try and figure them out. And, and he published extensively on this phenomenon of the storm surge. A very, very interesting, eccentric man. But, even back then, in the 1820s, 1830s, Kolkata's harbour was silting up. So the East India Company decided that they would open another port closer to the sea on the Matla River. Just the Matla River, we know what the Matla means, which means crazy. But nonetheless, they commissioned this port, they went ahead, they built this port. It was built on a huge scale. To look at Canning right now, you wouldn't imagine it. But it had some of the biggest hotels, banks, etc. It was meant to be a real showpiece settlement. So when Piddington heard about this, he wrote this impassioned letter to the Governor General saying, please don't build here. It is a certainty that within a few years, there will be a storm which will erase this port, Sure enough, the port was commissioned, I think it was 1856.
1856, yes.
Something like that. And in 1864, there was this, it wasn't a very big storm. It was actually quite a moderate storm. And this new settlement was completely erased. So, really, these threats are real. They're on our doorstep. People need to prepare. And I do think that, as as people within a cultural field, we have to try and find ways to address these things. And of course, as you said, in a way, to write about a flood or to make a film about a flood is possible. But you think about making a film about a heat wave. Like that which we had quite recently here. You're going to have your hero and heroine, very sweaty.
Yes. Visually not very appealing.
No. But you have to find a way around
it. On the other hand, the VFX and the CGI costs will be comparatively much lower. If you have to recreate a flood, I was just thinking that how about a biopic of Henry Piddington, which would make for a very interesting film. And I was trying to fit in inevitably Tom Alter, but that's a different story. But moving away from I think everyone is scared. So we know this is real. This goes beyond the realm of romantic doomsday films. So this is a real threat. We are talking Jodhpur Park and Lake Gardens. So it's like real. So now that we've realized that this is real, what about the preparation, the emergency measures? And I still remember, so this 2012, it is obviously that date came about because it was linked to the Mayan calendar, the long count calendar.
Yes.
The end of a 5,162-year-old long count calendar. So once that was kind of announced, a lot of things started happening. A lot of people started writing their will, and a lot of people started, confessing to things they've done and everything. No, on a more serious and a more climatic kind of a level, I think what Japan does is make earthquake-resistant buildings. As you said, that we have had evacuation measures which have at least kind of they've kind of reduced or alleviated the extent of the damage. So apart from getting scared, what else can we do?
Well, for one thing, I think all of us collectively need to put pressure on our institutions, at the local level, at the para level, the ward level, the municipal level, state level, national level, to start some sort of planning for these possibilities. Because, Kolkata is most of Kolkata is below sea level. Yes. Sea level rise actually means that we are going to have massive inundations in this city, and massive inundations also means, disease. And one of the strange and scary things about climate change is new forms of disease. I mean, just last week, you may have read, because of the thawing of the Siberian permafrost, a new strain of anthrax appeared, and there's a huge anthrax epidemic now in Siberia. So we're going to see all these strange mutations, and we have to start preparing for them, We have to, I think at an individual level, we can just do simple things, like reading this World Bank report and just seeing where your para is located. Unfortunately, one of the problems with this whole issue of climate change, and this again is what I really want to address here in terms of culture. Culture is mainly consumed by middle-class people and by people who are like bourgeois, in the part of a bourgeois sort of mindset. And it's become our way of thinking that we think that climate change is going to affect the poor and not us.
Yes.
But in fact, the most vulnerable people are middle-class people, because in the first place, so much of their wealth is invested in their houses, in their cars. They are the ones who will actually find it hardest to leave. Working class people have connections with the countryside. They're much more mobile. They're used to taking trains. They can easily leave. But if for yourself you start making plans for an evacuation, you just try and think of where you can go and in what ways you can actually abandon your house. These are very difficult calculations, but we are all going to be faced with them in the near or distant future.
In fact, I remember in the Mumbai floods, the maximum people who died were people who were stuck in the cars.
That's right.
They got suffocated. The system got short-circuited, and they couldn't come out, and they got
horrifying. I mean, it was a horrifying scenario.
Yes. So yes, so that. And again, as you kind of talked about in the book, about the high-rises being under threat. So the upwardly mobile, the rich, and the famous, they are also equally under threat, if not more, when a huge hurricane or a cyclone actually hits. So that is another thing, that it will affect everyone equally. It's not that...
It will, because, think of Mumbai, think of Kolkata. In cyclone-prone areas, people generally use all these sorts of reinforcement techniques. Windows have shutters, so that they can be boarded up and so on. But you imagine in the circumstance of a cyclone in Mumbai or Kolkata today, our cities are now filled with these asbestos sheets and corrugated iron roofing.
They will become projectiles.
They will become projectiles, which are just hurled against these glass windows. And these glass windows will shatter. People who are inside will they'll be
as you saw
exposed.
in the 1978 tornado, that you were going to take a shelter in a glass house, and
yes.
you escaped that actually.
Yes, I did. I escaped that tornado. Yes, but more than that, I think you'll see major building collapses. I mean, if a superstorm like Hurricane Sandy were to hit Mumbai or any major Indian city, our building standards are so low that you can be absolutely sure there'll be major building collapses. Even in the Mumbai floods of 2005, which were not accompanied by high winds, there were building collapses,
Absolutely.
So if you add water plus extremely high winds, you can be sure that there are going to be major building collapses. And, it's really something quite sobering.
Very interestingly, he points out in the book that it's intrinsically linked to culture, because there are cultural choices that we make which are very carbon intensive choices. Carbon intensive in the sense it eventually results in more emission of greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide, which again contributes to global warming. So for example, the car. So we might say that we are worried climate change, but inevitably we will renounce the carpool or public modes of transportation in favor of personal cars. Some families would even have 2 to 3 cars, so which will again contribute in some way or the other. And again, that lifestyle is a cultural choice. It you very beautifully illustrated that when you buy a car, it's not that you love steel or metal or the varnish. You have images of possibly Uttam Kumar with wind flowing through his hair, and or a Shah Rukh Khan driving the same car with the landscape of a highway. So these are very culturally specific choices, which again, given that the same culture or the cultural conduits can be used to manifest this concern, that could be possibly countered or balanced.
Yeah, if you actually think about, what we think of in our age as romantic imagery or, as imageries of freedom, actually, if you examine them, almost always they end up being carbon dependent. You're sitting in a car or you're sitting in an airplane or a ship, and you're sort of shooting forward, and there's this whole idea of speed and acceleration and so on. It's exactly as you say, you end up actually creating...
And you're sitting at the seaside,
yes,
with having a candlelit dinner with your partner, totally forgetting that it could be a tsunami around the corner. So that in itself is...
in Bangalore, I was doing a similar event with some ecologists and climate scientists, and one of the ecologists said that when this happened, he had a team in the Nicobars, and when the sea receded, this team were not able to process any idea of danger. They just went straight, followed the water, and taking pictures of the floundering fish and so on, and they were all killed.
They were all killed.
All killed. So you just imagine this how stupid we've become. We just feel ourselves to be invulnerable in some way. And we are not, we are not at all invulnerable. I mean, that anybody who sees some sort of perturbation of this kind, surely if you're a sentient human being, you must recognize that there is danger. This doesn't happen normally. And something really terrible is about to happen. You should run. So I often think, you mentioned that tornado that I was caught in Delhi. In Delhi, it so happened in 1978. I was a student doing my MA, 21 years old, and so on. And one day, I was studying in the library, and there was some odd weather, so I thought, no, I'll go home. I'll go back to my room. So I took a sort of detour to visit a friend and so on. And as I was going down this road, I suddenly looked over my shoulder, and there was this dark cloud. And suddenly a kind of finger came, extruded from this cloud and came whirling down towards me. And I had the common sense that I went and, took shelter. But I think if it were today, I'd probably be standing there taking a selfie. And as a result, there would be no book.
That's actually yes, absolutely. And like I was reading somewhere the other day that sure shot sign of intelligent life existing elsewhere is that they have not tried to contact us. So no, but seriously, I mean, we would be taking selfies in the face of a tornado, and while dying also we'll upload it on Facebook. Well, that was the last thing.
That's right.
Feeling morbid with a tornado. Yeah. So yes, just one last thing before I kind of throw open the house for questions is the theological twist you've given to the entire proceedings, as in how, as a society which initially was, or rather believed in the spiritual, the religious, the divine coexistence of nature and its elements, along with the supreme being, to a more, there is one man, there is one God, and depending on the religion, maybe a prophet in between. So, yeah, so that kind of a structure. So, even in Hinduism, like from the nature gods of the early Vedic period, we have moved more towards the predominance of the Brahmins and how they can act as a conduit between the gods and the commoner. So don't you think this is a small microcosm of the bigger pronouncement of nature, as in taking nature for granted, or making it just, or rather kind of exiling nature to our books and our definitions of zoology or botany or geology or astronomy or whatever, and kind of refusing to believe that nature might also have a soul of its own, a mind of its own, a design of its own. As you very beautifully wrote, that like the air can also start becoming, a life form by itself. So
yes, we see this. I have to say that my feeling really is that Pope Francis's encyclical on climate change is really the most important document written on this subject. It's an incredibly humane, beautiful, beautifully written document, and I think he's really somehow shown the way to an alternative imagining of these phenomena.
yes, so I think whether or not you would want to go home and read the World Bank report or Pope Francis, but do read The Great Derangement, because it is possibly one of the most important books that I've read in recent times. It is mildly eschatological and scary, but I also think that if you read it, you will perceive the threat much better than reading a dry World Bank report, which again also one should read. I am not denying that, but this will tie up your roots, like Mr. Ghosh does inevitably with every fiction or non-fiction that he writes. That it will hit at your collective memory. It will tie up your roots. It will tie up all the cultural loose ends that keep floating around us in virtual media all across the world, and it will connect all that with us and at an individual level, and then it will pose the question that, do we really want to be branded lunatics by our coming generations, that when we see all the signs, why couldn't we reflect the signs in popular literature and films and all the possible ways of communication, and thereby kind of give them a heads up that things might end just like that. So what is not ending, by the way, is the interaction. It will continue now with questions from all of you. So with whom should we start?
There's a question here.
There's a question here.